Part 1. Should I kill her today? The thought returned, sending cold sweat down Raskolnikov's back. But this time, there was no hesitation. The old woman, Alyona Ivanovna, a pawnbroker, a parasite who squeezed money from the desperate. Would the world be any worse without her? He had rehearsed it in his mind 100 times. Where to hide the axe, what time to visit, what excuse to get her to open the door. Today was the day. The sun burned down, and the streets of Petersburg were thick with dust and humidity. He hid the axe wrapped in cloth under his coat and hunched forward as he climbed the stairs. His heart pounded like a drum, and even his breath sounded deafening in his ears. He stood at the door and reached out to pull the bell cord.
Who is it?
Her cracked voice called from within.
I've brought something to pawn,
He replied flatly, like a line he had memorized. The door creaked open. She peeked out, a thin body, a wrinkled face, eyes hardened by greed. He stepped inside. As soon as she turned her back, the axe swung down. A heavy thud, the sensation of bone cracking, and blood, splashing, soaking, swallowing. She collapsed to the floor without a sound. He froze for a second, then snapped back to focus. He rifled through the drawers, grabbing jewelry, trinkets, a small box of coins. Then, the door opened. Someone walked in. Lizaveta, the old woman's sister, tall, gentle, quiet, known by everyone as a kind soul. She stepped into the room and saw the blood, the body, and Raskolnikov still holding the axe. His heart turned to ice. Lizaveta opened her mouth, but no sound came out. He shouted, "No!" She stepped back in horror, but it was too late. The axe came down again. There was no scream, only shock and despair. She collapsed, her eyes trembling, as if still trying to understand why. Everything shattered. The plan, the logic, the purpose. He had meant to rid the world of one parasite, but now he had murdered an innocent. He nearly collapsed, but instinct pulled him upright. There was no time. He had to clean up and escape. He seized a rag with trembling hands and wiped the door handle. Blood, fingerprints, traces. None could remain. He shoved the valuables into his pocket without even checking what they were. And then, a creak on the stairs. Someone was coming up. He swallowed. His heart pounded in his ears. 1 step, 2 steps. The sound grew closer. Suddenly, he bolted from the room into the hallway. His chest felt like it might explode. Sweat ran down his spine. His mind was blank. A shadow stretched down the stairs. He pressed himself flat against the wall, holding his breath. At the end of the hallway, a faint crack of light from the back door. He stepped forward quietly on the balls of his feet. Not a single creak, not a single sound. And then, he pushed open the door and vanished like a shadow. Sunlight, voices, the noise of the marketplace. He had walked through death and returned to a world where nothing had changed. He wandered the streets, unaware of where his feet were taking him. The sky hung in dull gray. People's voices washed over him like echoes underwater. Everything was distant, distorted. Only one thing filled his mind: Lizaveta's eyes. There had been no anger in them, no hatred, only confusion. The silent question, why me? Those eyes didn't accuse him. They didn't curse him. They simply didn't understand. And he couldn't forget them. He tried. He clung to his reasoning, his theory, his justification. But those eyes, they slipped past all that. They burrowed into the deepest part of his soul, where no theory could reach. They reflected what he had tried to avoid, the truth, the guilt, and the final scraps of his humanity. He never wanted to see them again. But when he closed his eyes, they returned, clearer than before. Lizavetta's eyes were no longer just a memory. They were punishment. Part 2. The Weight of Blood. The noise of the city faded behind him, and Raskolnikov walked as if his feet no longer touched the ground. The sunlight was sharp, but he felt no warmth. His body moved forward, yet his mind hovered somewhere above, detached. At a corner, he dropped onto a worn bench. His lips were cracked, and his thoughts were shrouded in fog. People passed by, but he saw none of them. Voices reached him like murmurs through water. One image returned again and again. Lizavetta's eyes. Suddenly, he stood up and headed toward a tavern. Maybe there. Maybe he could escape it all for a while. Inside the tavern it was dim and smelled of old smoke and sweat. Laughter and drunken chatter filled the air, but to him it sounded distant, as if echoing from another world. He sank into a chair. A glass was placed in front of him. He drank. The liquor burned down his throat. Warm, numbing, a false relief. But soon, it came back. The blood, the crushed skull of the old pawnbroker, Lizavetta's hand, her lips, her eyes. He buried his face in his hands.
I want to forget, sleep, disappear.
That night, he returned to his room and collapsed onto the bed. Nausea, chills, fever. His body gave way, and his mind floated in delirium. He remained in bed for 2 days straight. Someone knocked on the door, but he couldn't answer. Consciousness came and went. Dreams twisted with reality. Nightmares. Lizaveta stared at him. Even when he struck her down, she kept rising. She smiled. She bled. She walked toward him again and again. He screamed. He tried to run, but even in the dream, his legs wouldn't move. His body was heavy, and the air pressed on his chest. Days later, he awoke with blurred vision and sat up weakly. He looked in the mirror. A face he no longer recognized. Sunken eyes, ashen skin. It was real. All of it. He had killed 2 people. He opened the window. The sounds of the street, the voices, the clip-clop of horses. Life went on, but he no longer felt part of it. A knock on the door. He jumped.
Raskolnikov, you in there?
Razumikin's voice, his friend. He didn't answer, but the voice persisted. He leaned against the wall, not opening the door. His heart pounded. Every sound, footsteps, voices, felt like blades cutting into him. He felt hunted, watched, like everyone already knew, like the truth was written on his skin. And then, he knew he had to tell someone. Confess. But not to the police, to the one person who might understand. He thought of Sonia, poor, judged, selling herself to survive. But her eyes, they were clear, untainted. He went to her room and knocked. Soft footsteps, a cautious creak of the door. She looked startled to see him, but then quietly stepped aside. She let him in. The room was small, a frayed curtain, one flickering candle pushing back the darkness. He sat down, and she sat across from him. Silence. Even the air seemed to wait. He placed a trembling hand to his forehead. His lips were dry, and something heavy welled up in his chest. She didn't speak. She simply waited. Her gaze held no judgment, no fear, only patient warmth. He slowly raised his head. His eyes trembled.
It's me.
Barely a whisper. He exhaled sharply, then said it, like poison forced from his soul.
Those 2 people. I killed them.
The words floated in the air. The candle's flame seemed to flicker with the weight of them. Sonia did not gasp. Her eyes widened briefly, then softened. She said nothing. Instead, she reached out and gently laid her hand over his. Tears welled in his eyes. He lowered his head. He could not speak. But inside him, something broke. He had truly seen himself, for the first time. The crime was no longer theory. It had become confession, and that confession had become a burden too real to escape. Then softly, Sonia spoke.
Thank you for telling me.
And with those words, he crumbled. Part 3. The Confession. The room was filled with silence. Even after his confession, Raskolnikov couldn't speak for a long time. Only Sonia's hand rested gently on his trembling one. The candle flickered, casting shadows, and in those shadows, he confronted himself.
Why did you tell me?
Sonia asked quietly. He didn't answer. He only turned his head slowly and looked out the window.
I couldn't forget. It followed me. Everywhere. Even in my dreams. The blood. Her eyes.
Sonia nodded. He sighed deeply, as if placing down a heavy stone he had carried for years. He began to speak.
At first I had reasons. The world is full of injustice, and I thought people were just tools. Some are useful. Others don't even need to exist.
Sonia didn't interrupt. She simply listened, accepting the sound of his crumbling soul.
The old woman was greedy, cruel. She profited from others' despair. I truly believed that getting rid of someone like her wouldn't make the world worse. Maybe it would even make it better.
That's not justice. That's pride.
Sonia said gently.
No one has the right to judge who deserves to live or die.
He lowered his head.
I know. That's why I'm falling apart.
He stared at the wall. His eyes were vacant, his voice slow.
The second one wasn't planned. Lizaveta, she was just there. Her eyes, they were scared, yes. But deeper than that. Understanding, as if she saw into me.
He paused. His lips trembled.
She didn't scream. She didn't run. She just stood there. And that was even more terrifying. Like she had exposed something. Like she saw me, not the killer, but the man underneath.
Sonia closed her eyes. When she opened them again, they were brimming with tears.
Are you still running?
She asked. He shook his head instead of answering.
That's why I came. I don't want to run anymore. I thought Maybe you could see me. The real me.
Sonia stood up. She picked up a worn Bible from her desk and quietly returned.
Let me read something to you.
She began reading softly, in a trembling but steady voice. The story of Martha, Mary, and Lazarus, of death and resurrection, of sin and forgiveness. His eyes followed her lips. Her voice, though delicate, was unwavering. He closed his eyes. For a moment, there was peace.
It's not over for you.
Sonia said.
This is just the beginning. What you choose next will define you. You can turn away from your sin or face it, but the weight of it will always return.
He nodded slowly.
Will you stay with me?
He asked. She didn't answer. She simply took his hand again. It was cold, but she didn't let go. For the first time, he smiled, just slightly, then looked back out the window.
Yes. It's not over yet.
That phrase marked the end of hiding and running. He was now ready to confront himself, to begin again. And beside him, quietly holding his hand, was Sonia. She said nothing, but he understood. She would walk with him, through guilt, through pain, toward something new. Whatever came next, he would not be alone. Part 4. Judgment. The city was wrapped in gray fog. People on the street, the carriages, the sound of distant bells, all seemed blurred, as if behind a veil. Raskolnikov walked toward the police station, asking himself,
Am I really going now? Is this truly the end?
But his steps did not falter. Something was pulling him forward. Fate, perhaps, or maybe the instinct to self-destroy. He stood before Porfiry Petrovitch's office. For a moment, he hesitated. Then a voice from inside.
Come in.
Porfiry greeted him with his usual calm, polite tone. But his eyes, they glinted like a blade.
Mr. Raskolnikov, how is your health these days? You look rather pale.
He forced a smile.
I've been unwell.
Porfiry sat and continued.
There have been some fascinating cases lately. Take, for example, the murder of the old pawnbroker. Humans are such complex creatures. Sometimes we commit crimes and don't even understand ourselves why.
Raskolnikov swallowed hard. Each word landed deep in his chest, as if Porfiry were aiming for his conscience.
What do you think a crime is?
Porfiry asked. Raskolnikov avoided his gaze. Porfiry took a sip of water. Then he spoke quietly.
Crime isn't just breaking the law, it's betraying yourself. When you know who you are, but choose to turn away, that is when a man truly falls.
Raskolnikov looked up. In Porfiry's eyes, he saw both firmness and sympathy. He understood in silence. This man knows everything. But he waits. He's giving him the chance to confess willingly. That night, back in his room, Raskolnikov sat at his desk, a pen in hand, yet he couldn't write a single word. Outside, snow began to fall. A white world, covering everything, like it meant to cleanse. He looked into the mirror. The man staring back was no longer who he used to be. The one who walked through darkness with an axe. The one who believed he could judge the world. That man was gone. All that remained was a choice. Confess or remain silent. Face judgment or let it rot within. The next morning, he returned to the station. This time, he didn't hesitate. Porfiry was waiting for him. He nodded and gestured toward the chair.
So, you've made your decision.
Raskolnikov nodded. His hands trembled, but his eyes were steady. He spoke.
I killed them.
The words were few, but heavy with meaning. 2 lives taken, countless nights of guilt, the silence, the self-loathing, the suffocating weight of truth. Porphyry closed his eyes and nodded.
Then your true journey begins.
That evening, he was loaded into a carriage bound for prison. Along the street, Sonia stood silently. Through the window, he saw her. She wasn't crying. She simply raised her hand, watching him go. In her eyes was a wordless promise.
I will wait for you, and you will survive.
He nodded quietly in return. And then he thought,
Perhaps now I can truly begin again.
Part 5, Atonement. Endless snowfields, where sky and land seemed to blur into a single pale horizon. This was Raskolnikov's new world. Siberian exile. He endured it day by day. Hard labor, cold air, and isolation from the world. But the heaviest burden was still himself. He lived without fully understanding why he had sinned, or what had truly gone wrong. Sonia had followed him. Though she couldn't enter the penal colony, she lived in a nearby village and waited for him. Sometimes she sent letters, short, simple, but filled with warmth.
You are still human. Your crime doesn't define you. Your choices do.
But those words didn't reach him easily. Was crime only a choice? Or was it something rooted deeper, something in his very being? Among the exiles, some repented. Others blamed the world. He existed somewhere between them. He had once believed he was exceptional, that he could judge the world beyond laws and morality. But none of his theories or logic could explain Lizaveta's eyes, the fear and understanding in them. She hadn't run. She had only looked at him. And that had terrified him more than anything. One day, illness struck him down. For days he lay in fever. In that haze he dreamt. The entire world was sick. Everyone claimed to be right, killing one another in the name of their own truth. Truth itself had vanished. Each man followed only his own judgment. He screamed,
This is wrong. We're all wrong.
But no one heard him. They were all trapped inside their own righteousness. When he awoke, he wept for the first time. After recovering, he quietly took up a pen and paper. And he wrote a letter to Sonia.
Only now do I begin to understand. What I committed wasn't just murder. It was a betrayal of humanity. My arrogance, my attempt to make myself a god, that was the true sin.
After sealing the letter, he walked to the small chapel near the prison camp. No one was there, but he knelt slowly. He still couldn't speak the words aloud, but in his heart, something had shifted. Sonia wept when she read his letter, and on the next visiting day, she appeared with a brighter face. She said little, as always, but she saw the change in his eyes. He took her hand and whispered,
I am not yet forgiven, but I want to be.
She nodded.
That's all it takes. Forgiveness begins with that desire.
His exile continued. Snow still fell. Time still passed. The world remained cold and indifferent. But within him, a spark had ignited. He had come to believe. True atonement was not punishment. It was the decision to begin again. And Sonia was always there, silent, but certain. Closing reflection. As we end this journey through crime and punishment, we see that Dostoevsky's masterpiece is not merely about murder and justice, it is about the soul, guilt, and the long road to redemption. Raskolnikov was shattered by his crime, but through love and suffering, he began to rebuild his humanity. We, too, often believe ourselves righteous and judge others in the name of ideals. But true forgiveness, true redemption, begins in the quiet moment when we choose to start again. The night deepens. Thank you for being with us. We'll meet again on Midnight Pages